Hello guys and welcome to episode 9 where we talk about interceptors. If we take a look here, we can see that the interceptor can intercept a request before it even reaches the route handler, and it can also intercept the response, so it has access to both the request and the response. So before reaching the route handler and after reaching the route handler. And if you think about it, that's very useful because we can add things to our request, we can validate things, we can do a lot of things. And after getting the response, we can also do many things with it, such as caching it, formatting it, sanitizing it, and more. And if you take a look at the documentation, that's what they say. Interceptors have a set of useful capabilities which are inspired by the AOP technique. They make it possible to bind extra logic before and after the method execution, transform the result returned from a function, just like we said, transform the exception thrown from a function, extend the function behavior, and completely override a function depending on specific conditions such as caching. An interceptor in NestJs is simply a class decorated with @injectable. So as we know, this marks the class as a provider, and now it can be used as a dependency in our code. We've seen that in pipes, in service providers, and many other places such as auth cards as well. And this time we're implementing Nest Interceptor. Now if we take a look at Nest Interceptor, we can see that it has two different parameters. The context, which is of type execution context, which we've already seen in the auth cards video, but we're going to talk about it again. And then the next, which is a reference to the call handler, which will give us access to an observable representing the response stream from the route handler, and we're going to talk about that. We can also see that there's a method called interceptor, which has the context and the next, the two parameters that we've seen, and it returns whether an observable or a promise that returns an observable. If you're not very familiar with observables, basically whenever you're dealing or handling many asynchronous events, or you're receiving multiple values and not just one, you can use observables. And you know already promises, where you deal with one asynchronous event, you get or you receive one value. So the main difference between promise and observable is that in observables you're dealing with a stream of data. Now if you're not very familiar with observables or the RxJs library, I invite you to read more. They have their own documentations, but this video talks about interceptors. Now let's go back to our custom interceptor. We said that it's basically a class with @injectable, and this class implements the Nest Interceptor interface, which is why we need to implement the intercept method that is provided by that interface. And just like we've seen, it takes two different arguments: context, which is of type execution context, and next, which is of type call handler. Now if you go back to the authentication guard here, for example, we can see that we've already seen what execution context is, but if you go again, it's basically an interface which extends argument host, which we've already seen as well, which has a lot of methods such as switch to HTTP, and it gives us access to a lot of things such as the request, for example. And if you take a look at call handler now, it's an interface as well that has one method, which is handle, which returns an observable. So we can have a stream of data, and if we take a look here, it says returns an observable representing the response stream from the route handler. Now it starts to make sense. If we take a look here, we can see that the interceptor can actually intercept the response, so it can actually get the response returned from the route handler. And this is basically what the handle method does, and we're gonna see it in action. So I've added a log here before calling next.handle, so before even reaching the route handler and getting the response. And this log says request called by the interceptor, and then using the context, just like we said, we can have access to the request. So we switch to HTTP, since we can have microservices, or we could have switched to WebSockets and so on. And then we call the getRequest method, which gives us the request object. And then on that request object, just like in Express, we can say .original URL to get the URL. And then after that, we're calling next to handle. Now that we have created an interceptor that just logs the request original URL, we have to register that interceptor. We have to use it somewhere. So let's go to our custom controller, for example, and here on top of that route handler, let's go ahead and say use interceptors, and this is imported from NestJs/common, just like we have use pipes, use guards, and so on. And then here we can pass an array of interceptors, just like with pipes and so on. So custom interceptor, and just like we've seen previously, we can also say new and then give it an instance ourselves. Now if we save and then open Postman and make a call to this route handler next, if we take a look here, we can see request caught by the interceptor/customer, which is the route. Now to see some more meaningful things, let's say for example, okay, we got the request again from the context.getRequest, and then on this request we set the headers of accept language to FR or French, for example, and then we called next.handle. So what we've done basically here is we intercepted the request, and before even going or calling the route handler, we have changed something on that request. We set the accept language to French. And then here in the get all customer route handler, we are extracting the headers, the accept language part specifically, and then we're calling the variable language and we're logging the language. So let's go ahead and see what happens. If we open Postman and hit on send, if we take a look at the logs, request caught by the interceptor, which is our own log here, and then we can see FR inside of our controller or inside of our route handler. So we can see that here the accept language is the same one that we set in our interceptor. So we were able to make some modifications on the request before actually entering the route handler. It's important to note that if we don't call next.handle, the request isn't going to reach the route handler here. So this is necessary if you want to go and handle that request. So we saw how we can bind the interceptor on top of a route handler, but let's see what other choices we have. First of all, let's try to call this route handler, create customer, and see what happens. So here I'm just gonna send body name John, hit on send, and we've created John. So now if you take a look here, we saw in the route handler logic with body John, and that's the log that we have here inside of this route handler, but we do not see any request caught by the interceptor log, and that's because like we said, we have registered the interceptor, the custom interceptor, on top of get all customers. So now if I call get all customers, send, we received John in the array, and this time we also got request caught by the interceptor and the language French that we set inside of our interceptor here. Now if we wanted to bind it on top of a controller, we can do that. So here, use interceptor. If we save it, this interceptor will be applied to every single route handler underneath that controller. Of course, here we can have an array, a list of interceptors, just like we can in pipes and so on. We can have an array. But now that we have registered this interceptor on the controller level, if you go ahead and press on create customer, if you hit on send, now we can see that request caught by the interceptor, and then we see the log from the route handler. And just like we can apply pipes and filters globally, we can also do app.use global interceptors, and then here we can create new custom interceptor, for example, and then it will be applied to every single route in our application. So these are the different ways you can bind interceptors. So far we've seen how we can modify a request or have some logic or intercept the request before calling next.handle, so before reaching the route handler. Now let's see what we can do with the response and how we can actually make changes after receiving the response, because here what we're doing is we're writing code that gets executed before reaching the route handler, before getting the response, and that's because this code exists before next.handle. Now let's see how we can actually get the response from next.handle and then execute some code afterwards, so after actually intercepting the response. If we take a look at handle, we can see that it returns an observable representing the response stream from the route handler. Let's try to log that. So let's say const response equal await next.handle, and then here let's return that response. And here let's try to log it and see what happens. If we save and run, here inside of get customers, if we hit on send, it's an empty array now. If you take a look here, the response is observable, which is an object with source and operator. And that makes sense because as we've seen here, handle actually returns an observable. Now, thanks to RxJs, we actually have something called first value from, which, if you take a look here, it converts an observable to a promise by subscribing to the observable and returning a promise that will resolve as soon as the first value arrives from the observable. After that, the subscription will be closed, meaning it will no longer accept any other values. And that makes sense because we said that in observables, we can have a stream of data, so we can return multiple values. When we use first value from, we're actually just getting the first value, and then we're closing that stream. We no longer are subscribed to that observable. We don't care about other values. And of course, it, just like it said here, it converts that observable to a promise. So now, having used first value from, let's see what happens. If we hit send, if you take a look here, we can see that the response is an array now. Now the response in Postman is still the same, but now we can see that this response object is the actual JSON that we returned from our controller and no longer the observable object. Here we can see that we can do response mapping, so we can format the response. Here they say we already know that handle returns an observable. We already know that, we've seen that in action. The stream contains the value returned from the route handler, exactly, and thus we can easily mutate it using RxJs map operator. Also, side note that the response mapping feature does not work with the library-specific response strategy, so whenever we use @res to handle the response ourselves, this mapping does not work with it. Now, if we take a look here at that example, here what they're doing is, inside of this interceptor, they are just calling next.handle, so they're calling the handler, and then once they get the observable or the stream response data as an observable, they can use .pipe, which is from RxJs, and they can use the map operator to map the response. So here they got the data, which is the actual data received from this observable, and then they are returning it as a JSON object with the key data. And that's what we were talking about earlier when we said we can format the data. Let's see that in action. So this time, instead of actually converting the response from an observable to a promise, I'm going to keep it as is, and let's get map from RxJs, and then here the response that we get, let's just say data, and then we can also have timestamp, for example, and then we can have new date or whatever. If we save that now, and in my controller I'm returning 3 different customers, let's say, if we hit on get, on send, as you can see, this time our JSON object doesn't just return the array here that we have in our controller or route handler. Instead, we're actually mapping this response and formatting it in this way: data as a key and then the timestamp. If we take a look here in Postman, we can see data and then whatever our route handler responded with, and then we have the timestamp that we have added in our interceptor. This one was a perfect example of how interceptors can actually have access to the response from the route handler and perform some logic on it. Here they show you how you can also sanitize some data. So for example, let's say you have a value returned with a value of null, you can override it with empty string, for example, and so on. This is just another example, but of course you can get very creative and add a lot of logic here in your interceptor. Now, if you want to get more familiar with RxJs, they have an official documentation. Here we've seen the map operator. So for example, if you had 1, 2, 3, and then here we had .pipe, and then we're mapping the response x, and then we're returning x times x. So for 1 it would be 1, for 2 it would be 2 times 2, 4, for 3, 3 times 3, 9, and then we're subscribing and then logging the values. So here we got value 1, value 4, and value 9. We have another operator, for example first, which will return only the first data from our stream. So here we have a stream of data, 1, 2, 3. It just returned the first one, the first value that we got. There are a lot of operators, creation operators like these ones, join creation operators like these ones, and filtering operators like filter, last, skip. You can do a lot with RxJs. but in this video we're just scratching the surface and focusing on the interceptor concept. Another use case for interceptors could be for logging a request or how long a request takes. We can also do that with a middleware, such as you've seen in a previous episode here. I created a middleware which logs a response, so I used res.on and then I log the time. You can also do that here with an interceptor. So you can see that sometimes the role of an interceptor can overlap with the role of a middleware. However, there are differences between them, and a request reaches a middleware before reaching an interceptor. And at the end of this video, I'm actually going to show you a graph to make things easier. Since you have pipes, filters, interceptors, middlewares, it can get confusing. So at the end of this video, I'm going to show you the ordering in which the request goes through every and each one of those different concepts. An important use case could also be timeout. So for example, you can use the timeout operator here. So let's say you make a request and then it takes longer than 5 seconds. Like in this case, you would like your interceptor to throw an error saying request timeout. So you can do that as well with interceptors. Another use case could be caching. And this is a very nice way of showing that interceptors can access the request and the response and can execute some code before the route handler and after the route handler. Because in caching, for example, before calling next.handle, you might check your cache, for example, Redis, if you have certain data cached. So you check if a key exists with the data you want. If that's the case, you can return that data from the cache. That way, you also haven't called next.handle, so you cut or you overrode the function. So just like you've seen here, for caching purposes, you can completely override a function. So here we did that. We did not enter our customer controller, for example, at all. But let's say we did not have that specific data we're searching for in our cache, then we would need to call the next.handle method, which is going to go to the route handler, which is going to reach this point and then return a response. And since in an interceptor we have access to that response, we got the response here and then we can cache it. So next time it will be cached, it will be returned right away without actually having to call next.handle again. Now, I might make an episode showing actual caching with the caching interceptor, or we can also build our own custom caching interceptor, but not in this episode. So to summarize, an interceptor is simply a class decorated with @injectable and implements the Nest interceptor interface, which has two different parameters: context, which gives you a lot of information about the route or the class or route handler that is going to be called next, and the request object and so on, and the next object, which has the handle method, which will allow you to call the route handler. And we have the intercept method, which returns an observable or a promise of an observable. Observable is basically when we have a stream of data being returned. So we have a lot of things we can do, a lot of operators provided by the RxJs library. Inside of our interceptor, we can have code before next.handle. And again, next.handle is going to invoke our route handler. So the route handler being called by the request. And anything before that is actually this part here, before reaching the route handler. So we have access to the request, we can make changes, we can have some logic to check for a few things, and we can also return a different response without actually calling next.handle, like if we have caching, for example. And then after calling next.handle, which returns an observable, like we've seen before, and on that observable we can have a lot of things, for example .pipe, and then we can use many operators. We've seen the map operator, which helped us format our response. We've seen the timeout operator, and we have many more. We also saw that we can use first value from the RxJs library, so we can convert our observable to a promise. We also saw that we can bind or register our interceptor on the controller level, or on the level of a route handler, or globally in main.ts using app.use global interceptor. So I found this graph on Stack Overflow, and I'm gonna use it since it's gonna make things easier. This shows the request response pipeline. So whenever a client makes a request, The first step is the middleware. So the request is going to go to the middlewares in line, different middlewares or one middleware, which implements Nest middleware. And here we can have a lot of things. We can change the request, the response, and so on. And it also supports existing Express middleware such as Course, Body Parser, Morgan, and so on. After that, the request is going to go to our auth guards. We can have many as well. Here we can check our token. We can check that the user has the required permissions and so on. And again, the guards implement can activate interface. Here we can either continue or throw an error. Now let's say we continue because everything is fine. The request is going to go to the interceptors. So the third step after the middlewares and the guards is the interceptor. Here we can see it divided into two parts, before the route handler and then after the route handler. Just like we've seen here, before the route handler, everything being done before actually invoking next.handle, which invokes our route handler, and then everything after, which is this part right here. Now, after the request enters our interceptor, which by the way implements Nest interceptor, like we've seen in this video, the request is going to go to our pipes now, which implements pipe transform, where we can actually transform our input, validate it, and do many things. If everything is fine, the request is going to go to our route handler side of our controllers, where we can handle the request, communicate with the database, talk to our services, do some business logic, and then here, after the route handler, we can see next.handle.pipe, or we can take it and then convert it into a promise and handle it. But this is the part where it's talking about after the route handler. And then in case we have an error, the last step is the exception filter. So the request would go to the exception filter, which is going to be the last stop. In case we don't have an exception thrown, then the response is returned. But this is basically the flow. First of all, we have the middlewares, then the guards, interceptors come third, then the pipes, then of course here we get the response after going into the route handler, and the last one in our pipeline is the exception filter. Now to test that out, I have added logs. So inside of our auth guard, console.log request enter the auth guard, and then here I'm gonna return true so that the request keeps on going. Inside of our middleware, I added request entered the middleware. In the custom interceptor, I added request entered the interceptor, and then I created a dummy pipe that also logs request entered the pipe here. And then here on top of the get all customers route handler, I'm going to apply the guard, which is authentication guard, the interceptor, the custom pipe, and then the middleware is being applied globally, so we're all good. And if you've watched the episode of the middlewares here, I'm applying it everywhere, the logging middleware, where I have this log. Let's go ahead and hit send here and take a look at our logs. We can see request entered the middleware, then request entered the auth guard, and then request entered the interceptor, which is actually what you've seen here: middleware, guards, and then interceptor. Now the reason we didn't get the pipes log is because here we forgot to do something. In order for us to actually go into the custom pipe, we need to at least, for example, have add query or add body. Then here we can have the query. Now this part of the request is going to go into the pipe. So now if we save, it's going to trigger the pipe if we hit on send. As you can see, middleware, auth guard, interceptor, and pipe. And this ordering here does not mean anything. Make sure that it doesn't matter. Let's say you had pipe first, and then you had interceptor, and then finally auth guard. It's not going to change the logs because the request is going to be following the pipeline order that we've seen here. That makes sense. So let's go ahead and test that theory. I'm gonna hit send. As you can see, the request entered the middleware first, then the auth guard, interceptor, and finally the pipe. So don't forget, the ordering here makes no sense. This is not the actual ordering that the request is going to follow. This is the actual ordering that the request is going to follow. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, give me any video suggestions, and I'll see you in the next video.